They said the man was generous. They said he listened. They said no one was ever forced. Yet, in the village of Kaluma, daughters began to disappear, and hunger did not. By the time the truth surfaced, God has already changed hands. Mothers has already said yes, and silence has already been bought. This is a story of a girl who was given away to save a village, and the dark secrets that waited behind wealth, obedience, and empty promises. Hi guys, welcome back to Mystery Echoes. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. By the time dusk settled over Kaluma village, hunger had already taken its place among the people. Cooking fires burned in every compound, but the pots above them were empty. Mothers stared anyway, scraping wooden spoons against bare metal, keeping up a performance everyone understood. Children gathered with bowls in their hands, standing quietly, already aware of the answer, waiting for them. Hunger was no longer loud. It had learned to sit patiently. Sade sat beside her mother and watched the familiar ritual unfold. The pot had nothing, yet her mother stared as if food might appear through effort alone. Around them, the village mirrored their struggle, fires glowing, no steam rising, no smell of food. No one complained. Complaining had become pointless. As night crept in, the mothers' voices grew closer, forming a circle around the fires. They spoke softly but confidently, using careful words that hid sharp intentions. They talked about opportunity, about wisdom, about how marrying well was not a crime. Poverty, they said, was the real shame. Endurance, they claimed, was a woman's strength. Sade listened from the edge, aware that the conversation was meant to pass over her head while shaping her future. Her mother said little, but her silence felt heavier than words. Then a name entered the air, Chief Bamidele. It was spoken gently with respect, as though it might bruise if handled too roughly. The women spoke of him as a man who listened, a man who did not force anyone, a man who spoke only to mothers. They said his generosity silenced hunger. When someone asked whether the daughters ever returned, the question was smoothed away with promises of care and full stomachs. As the night deepened, Sade felt the village gaze shift. Girls were no longer simply daughters. They were solutions. Mothers began measuring with their eyes, praising quietness, obedience, and beauty that did not ask questions. Sade felt herself shrinking under those looks, becoming something that could be counted. Eventually, the truth could no longer be avoided. There would be no food that night. Empty bowls were put away. Children were sent to sleep with gentle lies about tomorrow. Sade's mother lingered over the empty pots, turning it in her hands, tracing an old crack along its rim. She spoke quietly about how not everything could be fixed. Then she asked Sade a question she had never asked before: whether Sade trusted her. Sade said yes. In the darkness that followed, no bargain was spoken and no promise was made. But between the empty pots, the careful words, and the silence that stretched between mother and daughter, a decision had already been formed. Hunger had made it. Morning arrived in Kaluma without relief. The sun rose pale and unforgiving, revealing a village that had gone to sleep hungry and woken up the same way. People stepped out of their homes quietly, moving with an odd sense of purpose, as if the day had already decided what it wanted from them. Sade felt it immediately. Something had changed. As she walked toward the river with her calabash, she saw them, three polished carts, standing at the edge of the village square. Their wheels were clean, untouched by the red earth. Two men sat beside them, still and patient, like guards who knew they would not be challenged. The village slowed. Mothers paused, in doorways. Conversation died halfway through sentences. Sharp whisper followed daughters who lingered too long. Inside, stay close, go and sweep. Then the man stepped down from the largest cat. Chief Bamidele did not look like a savior or a monster. He was simply calm. His clothes were plain but flawless. His skin showed no sign of travel, heat, or hunger. He stood as if Kaloma had been expecting him, and in truth, it had. People gathered without being called. From the edge of the village, Sade watched the scene unfold. Chief Bamidele finally spoke. His voice was gentle but carried easily. "Good morning," he said. "I have come to listen, nothing more." The silence that followed was heavy, but it did not last. One mother stepped forward, then another. Soon, words poured out. Complaints about empty field, crying children, unpaid debt, and the shame of enduring poverty year after year. Chief Bamidele listened. He did not interrupt. He did not promise. He did not bargain. His quiet attention made the women speak more freely than they ever had. As they leaned closer, daughters were pushed softly backward, removed from the center of the gathering like objects not meant to hear their own futures being discussed. Sade watched her mother hesitate only for a moment before joining the circle. Their eyes met briefly. Her mother looked away. In that moment, Sade understood something cold and final. This man had not come to convince Kaloma of anything. He had come because the village was already ready. Ready to trade, ready to justify, ready to give. And Chief Bamidele, patient and silent, was their only way to receive. By afternoon, the village of Kaloma had settled into a strange calm. Chief Bamidele was gone, his cat already rolling away beyond the trees, but his presence remained. It lingered in the way mothers spoke in low voices, in how daughters were kept close, watched more carefully than before. Hunger still lived in the houses, but now it had competition. Hope. Sade sat inside her mother's hut, sorting dried leaves with slow, deliberate movements. Her mother had been quiet since the morning, moving about with purpose but saying little. When she did speak, her words were clipped, rehearsed, as though she were afraid of saying too much. Outside, a mother laughed. It was not a joyful sound. It was sharp, almost triumphant. "They say he did not even argue," the woman said. "He only nodded." Another voice answered, softer. "That is how you know the offer is serious." Sade's hand stilled. Her mother stepped into the doorway and closed the woven mat behind her. The light dimmed. For a long moment, she stood with her back to Sade, breathing slowly. "You did not go to the river this afternoon," she said. "No," Sade replied. "You did not ask me to." Her mother turned. Up close, Sade noticed the tightness around her face, the way her jaw was set as though holding something in place. She sat across from Sade, smoothing her wrapper again and again. "Sade," she began, then stopped. Silence filled the hut. "There are things," her mother said carefully, "that a child cannot understand until she becomes a woman." Sade looked at her. "Like hunger?" Her mother flinched, just slightly. "Yes," she said, "like hunger, like responsibility." Sade waited. Her heart beat faster, though nothing had been said yet. "I spoke to Chief Bamidele today," her mother continued. "He listened to me, to our story." "Our story?" Sade repeated softly. Her mother nodded. "He knows how we have suffered. How you have suffered." Sade's chest tightened. "And what did he say?" "He said nothing," her mother replied, "but he offered help." The word help sat heavily between them. What kind of help? Sade asked. Her mother reached out and took her hands. Her grip was firm, almost desperate. A chance, she said. A way out of this life. You will eat well. You will wear fine clothes. You will never know this kind of hunger again. Sade pulled her hand back slowly. And you? Her mother's eyes shone. The house will be full again. People will respect us. Sade understood then. This was not about rescue. It was about escape. You already agreed? She said. Her mother did not deny it. I am your mother, she said. Her voice rising just a little. I will not lead you into harm. Sade searched her face, looking for doubt, for fear, for hesitation. She found resolve instead. Outside, the village hummed quietly, already adjusted to the decision that has been made. By the evening came, word had spread, Sade would be married. And in Kaloma, no one questioned a mother who said yes. Kaloma prepared for the wedding as though it were a festival. That was what unsettled Sade most. Women swept the path with sudden energy. Clothes were shaken out and tied with care. Someone borrowed a drum that had not been touched in years. The village moved quickly, eagerly, as if joy could be summoned simply by acting like it was already present. No one asked Sade how she felt. She sat inside her mother's hut, while hand reached for her, tying her hair, straightening her wrapper, clicking tongues in approval. Their praise fell softly but without warmth. She is calm. That is good. She will not cause any trouble. Sade felt like a package being wrapped neatly for delivery. Her mother watched closely, correcting small things. When Sade tried to speak, she was silenced with a look. This is not the time for fear, her mother said. People are watching. Outside, the sound of drum began, steady but hollow. There was singing, though it lacked the careless joy Sade remained bad from other weddings. The songs were louder than necessary, as if meant to drown out something else. When Sade was led into the open, the sun sat high above Kaloma, unforgiving and bright. People lined with cheering, smiling too hard, nodding with approval. She set the crowd for a familiar face, someone who might look at her with concern, but found none. She immediately stood near the center. He wore no ceremonial clothes, no ornaments to mark the occasion. He looked exactly as he had the day before, calm, untouched, patient. When Sade approached, his gaze rested on her briefly, assessing without curiosity. She felt herself shrink. The ceremony was short. Words were spoken about provision and honor. No one mentioned love. Sade was guided through each step, told when to kneel, when to stand, when to respond. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. When she answered, she did not consent. She complied. When it was over, cheers rose from the crowd. Coins exchanged hands quietly at the edges. Mothers smiled at one another, relief softening their faces. Sade's mother embraced her tightly. You will thank me one day, she whispered. Sade did not answer. Before the sun could lower itself toward evening, Sade was led away. The cat waited, polished and ready. As she climbed into one, she looked back at Kaloma, the dust, the houses, the people who had raised her. No one met her eyes. The drums continued to beat as the cat rode forward, carrying Sade away from the village that had decided her words and celebrated the prize. The journey away from Kaloma was silent. The wheels of the cat creaked steadily, cutting through paths Sade had never walked before. Trees thickened. The air changed. Even the birds sounded different, quieter. as if the forest itself had learned restraints. Sade sat alone, hands folded in her lap, watching the village disappear behind her. No one explained where she was going. No one asked if she was afraid. By the time the cat stopped, the sun was already lowering. The estate stood before her, wide, high-walled, impossible clean. Stone paths led inward, polished and cold beneath her bare feet. Servants moved without sound, their eyes lowered, their steps measured. Everything looked expensive, nothing looked alive. Inside, the rooms were large and carefully furnished, yet strangely empty. The walls had no family marks, no signs of history. Sade felt like she had entered a place meant to impress, not to live in. She was led through corridors that echoed softly with each step, until a door opened onto a quiet courtyard. That was where she saw them, the other wives. They sat apart from one another, each in her own corner, dressed well, fed well, and utterly still. Some were young, some looked older than they should have been. When they lifted their eyes to Sade, there was no surprise in them, only recognition. One woman spoke at last. "You are new?" Sade nodded. Another gestured for her to sit. "Do not ask questions," loudly, she said. "Was listen." Sade's heart pounded. "Why are you here?" The women exchanged looks. Finally, the first one answered, "Because our mothers agreed." That night, Sade lay on a soft bed beneath a high ceiling, staring into the dark. She listened to whispers pass through the halls, not words, but breath, like people praying without sound. She understood then what Kaluma had owed and sowed. Not daughters, but silence. And as sleep finally claimed her, Sade realized this house was not built to hold joy. It was built to keep women from being heard. Sade learned the rules of the house without anyone teaching them to her. Morning came quietly. Servants appeared with food laid out carefully. Warm, plentiful, beautifully prepared, yet no one ate with appetite. The other wives moved slowly, conserving energy, speaking only when necessary. When Sade tried to ask questions, answers came wrapped in warnings. Do not speak his name too often. Do not wander at night. Do not refuse what you are given. It was days later, though time felt strange there, that Sade saw the room beneath the house. She followed a servant down a narrow corridor, past a door she had never noticed before. The air changed as they descended, growing cooler, heavier. The servant stopped at the entrance and would not go further. Inside, God lined the walls, not as decoration, but as containment. Symbols were etched into the floor, old and deliberate. At the center stood a shallow basin, darkened by stains that had never fully faded. This is where he renews himself, one of the wise whispers behind her. Sade turned. The woman's eyes were shallow, her voice steady, only because she had practiced sounding calm. What does it take? Sade asked. Time, the woman replied. Strength, what belongs to us. Another wife spoke, her voice barely there, but it only work if the offering is willing. Sade felt her breath catch. We did not choose this. The woman shook her head slowly. No, but our mothers did. The truth settled heavily. She voluntarily did not steal yours. You received it. God was only the language of the exchange. That night, Sade lay awake, staring at the ceiling. her mother's voice echoing in her mind, "Do you trust me?" For the first time since leaving Kaloma, anger burned hotter than fear. And in that a plan began to form, not to beg, not to escape, quietly, but to answer the demand that had been made in her name. Sade learned quickly that survival in that house required performance. She softened her voice, she lowered her eyes, she thanked Shibramidele for every kindness he offered, even when her hands shook as she received them. He noticed. "You are settling well," he said one evening, as they sat across from one another, a white table between them. He ate slowly, carefully, as though eating were a habit learned rather than a need. "I listen," Sade replied. "That is what is expected of me." A faint smile touched his lips. Listening is valuable. From that day on, he spoke more freely in her presence, not of feelings, but of rituals, of order, of balance. He spoke of wealth as something alive, something that's demanded respect and regular feeding. The mistake people make with other ones is believing power can be taken. True power must be given. Sade nodded, storing every word. At night, she whispered with the other wives, piecing together fragments of truth. They showed her which symbols mattered, which words shaped the ritual, which moments could not be interrupted. "He is preparing the final ceremony," one of them said quietly, "the one meant to make him permanent." Sade felt a calm settle over her. She had been given away once without her voice. She would not be taken again in silence. When Shibamidele announced that the village of Kaloma would be invited to witness the ceremony, Sade bowed her head respectfully. Inside, she smiled for the first time since leaving home, because the same greed that had opened the door would also be used to close it. At this time, everyone would be watching. The day of the ceremony arrived, dressed as celebration. Kaloma came alive before sunrise. Mothers wrapped themselves in their finest clothes. Men followed behind, curious but quiet. The road to Shibamidele's estate filled with people who had never been invited anywhere before. Sade stood at the center of it all, washed, dressed, adorned in gold that felt heavy against her skin. She moved as she had been taught, slow, respectful, obedient. No one noticed how steady her hands were. Shibamidele welcomed the villagers with a gracious nod. His voice was calm, confident, certain of the outcome. "We have come to witness continuity," he said, "to see what generosity makes possible." The ritual chamber was open. Gaps rose as the villagers saw the gold line walls. The symbols carved deep into stone. Mothers pressed forward, eyes wide, not with fear. This was where their sacrifice had gone. Sade knelt where she was instructed. She began to speak. The words flowed smoothly at first, exactly as Shibamidele had taught her. Power stirred, the air taken. The gold hummed softly. Then she changed a word, just one. The symbols flickered. She continued, uttering another phrase, carefully, deliberately. The gold began to crack, airline fractures spreading like veins. Shibamidele stiffed. "Stop," he said sharply. Sade did not. She raised her voice, no longer gentle, no longer obedient. The words she spoke now returned what had been taken: strength, youth, and breath. The room shook. Shibamidele cried out as his body began to fold inward, years crashing down upon him all at once. His skin sagged, his voice broke, gold shattered from the walls, falling uselessly to the floor. The villagers screamed, mothers reached forward. They froze, recognizing the truth too late. Sade stood as the ritual ended. The power spent. The man who bought daughters lay broke at their feet, and the silence that followed was louder than any celebration Kaluma had ever known. The god stopped humming. It felt quiet, the way a body does after a last breath leaves it. She immediately lay on the floor of the ritual chamber, shrunken and trembling, his skin loose on his bones, his eyes wide with disbelief. The years he had taken did not return gently. They rushed back into him, crushing his voice into a thin broken sound. "No," he whispered. This is not how it ends." Sade did not answer. Around them, the estate began to fill. Cracks spread across the walls. God split and dulled, losing its giants, as if embarrassed to be seen. Servants fled, mothers screamed and covered their mouth, horror finally overpowering wealth. Shibra immediately reached towards Sade. With a shaky hand, they gave them willingly. He rasped, "I only accepted." "Yes," Sade said quietly, "and now we are receiving what you earned." His hand fell. By the time the villagers relayed back outside, the great house had begun to sink into itself, folding inward like something ashamed of its own existence. The man who bought daughters was carried away in silence, reduced to something small and mortal. Kaluma watched, and for the first time, the village understood what its gold had been feeding. The daughters, they did not return to the house. They stood together at the edge of the broken estate, Sade among them, watching Kaluma from a distance. The village looked smaller than she remembered, quieter too, as though it were waiting to be judged. The mother came forward, slowly. There were no sound now, no song, no drums, only footsteps and breath heard too long. Some women reached for their daughters, tears spilling freely. Others could not lift their eyes at all. Sade's mother stepped forward last. "Sade," he said, her voice trembling, "come home." Sade looked at her mother. For a long time, she saw regret there, real regret, but it did not erase what had been done. "We will not live as before," Sade said, "not in silence, not in hunger." The daughters did not return as offerings. They returned as voices. Kaluma changed after that day. The gold that had once fed the village turned dull and useless. It could not buy food. It could not buy favor. The people were forced to face what they had been avoiding for years. Work. Faith that had been abandoned were cleared. Ants that once waited for rescue learned to plant again. Mothers rose before sunrise, not to bargain but to farm. Fathers joined them. Children followed, learning soil instead of silence. The first harvest was small, but it was theirs. The next season, the land responded. Yam vines thickened. Maize stood tall. The village learned that hunger was not defeated by shortcuts, but by patience and shared labor. Sade did not stay in Kaluma, but she returned often. She taught the guests to speak early, to question gently, to refuse quietly if they must. Her mother worked the field every day. She did not complain. And in Kaluma, the story of Shibra Midele was no longer told as a warning about power, but as a lesson about greed. Because the village learned that God never could teach. Hunger ends when people stop selling the future to feed the present. Greed may promise comfort, but it always demands a price greater than it gives. When people trade their values, their voices, or their children for quick relief, the cost returns multiplied. True survival is not found in shortcuts or silent sacrifices. but encourage accountability and shared efforts. A future built on expectation will collapse, but one built on truth, work, and dignity can endure. Hi besties, thanks for watching. See you some other time. Bye bye.